Hi everyone, it's Denise with Wondubar Crafts. We are back today in this video to hopefully finish up this little wall hanging. In the last video, we completed our quilt top for their crazy staircase to nowhere. And I hope you guys are really enjoying this. And I surely am. I know that. So in today's video, we are going to attempt to finish this up, which means we're going to do our backing and batting and attach it to our quilt top. And then I'm going to show you how to stitch in the ditch. Okay, quilting method. If you are a little more advanced and you don't want to stitch in the ditch and you want to do a decorative stitch or do some stimpling or some freestyle quilting, go ahead, be my guest. It is, after all, your wall hanging. So, but I just want to show you stitch in the ditch is a very basic way to quilt something. And essentially what it is you're going to stitch in this seam line all the way up and over and then accentuate each of the staircases by doing the block. So, and it looks like it's going to be, oh my gosh, a lot, but really it's squared off. So we're going to stitch down the middle, then this side, then this side, then the centers up here, and I'll show you all of that, I promise. And I'm going to give you some additional tips on different feet. I talked a little bit about it in the first video, giving some of the basics, but I kind of want to explain a little better on different feet that you can use to do this with. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. We need a nice flat surface, so I have taken off my cutting board so that I have a nice soft surface, or nice flat surface. And then I'm going to take my backing material, which is cut 23 to 23, and I'm going to lay it wrong side up. And if it's directional like mine is, I'm going to make sure that it is in the direction that I want it to go. I could go long ways if I wanted, either way. So actually, let me turn it this way. So if you notice, I have a salvage edge here, and I left that salvage edge because I know that it's going to get cut off because it is about 2 inches on both sides, larger, anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2 inches larger than my quilt top. And the reason why we cut that a little larger is, and I kept my salvage edge because I know this edge won't fray, but you're handling your quilt a lot during the quilting process. So you're going to get some fraying on your edges, and you don't want too much fraying, because if it was cut to the size of your quilt top, so let's take a look at that. Think about that for a second. If it was cut to the top to the size of your quilt top, when you quilt, you will get a little puckering, okay? So that shortens the length of your batting and backing. And then if it's fraying, you may not have enough fabric to pick up the binding. And then you're going to have loose areas, where it didn't pick it up, and you're going to get very frustrated. Trust me. So, like I said, I've cut this about 1.5 inches to 2 inches larger than my quilt top. So I've laid that out, and I ironed it to make sure all the wrinkles were taken out and it's nice and smooth. And then I've taken a piece that is about 23 to 23. It's a little bit larger. I had this piece is kind of like an extra piece that was kind of sitting around. So I want to make sure that at least a couple of my edges are even, because I'm going to clip it. So lay it out, smooth it out. And what I did prior to this is I took my iron and I turned it down to wool setting. Even though this is a cotton poly blend, it's more cotton than it is poly. I don't want to press it down to where all the fibers are smashed down, because this is a very thin batting. This is only about 1/16 of an inch thick. You can use thicker batting if you so choose, and that will also determine the foot that you're going to want to use to quilt. Okay, also you have to take that into consideration. This is a wall hanging. I want it to lay I want it to have the quilt look, but I want it to lay as flat as possible up against the wall. So I'm using a thinner batting. All right, so because my batting now is a little longer, I want to try and get this to the edge as much as possible here. And just like squaring off, you're just going to kind of put your pieces together there. It's okay if you have a little excess over the back, that's okay. But the reason why I'm going to trim mine is because I'm going to clip my batting and my backing together. You can pin it if you want. I would suggest that you do something because it is larger than your quilt top. You don't want it shifting too much, okay? So I think we're good. Take a good pair of scissors here, and I'm just going to cut my excess off here. You can use a rotary cutter if you so choose. This is 23 inches. I don't have a ruler that long. Well, I think mine is like 24, but I don't have to put my cutting board back on. So there we go. So now, just make sure it's all smooth. The majority, if you've ever taken batting out of a package, you know you'll get like fold lines in it. You want to try and get those out as much as possible. You probably will not get all of them out unless you use a hotter iron, and I really wouldn't suggest it because you're going to kind of have, you may have flatter spots in one area than another. So just get it as smooth as you can. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clip these edges with my clips. You can use pins if you so choose. Don't go running out and buying something that, you know, unless you want these. But I love clips because they're so good for so many different projects, not just sewing. I'm going to put about 4 per side here, just to make sure that it stays secure. And I'm turning it so I don't have to lean too much. And if you're an experienced quilter and there's another method that you like, feel free to share it. We're always eager to try something new. This edge just doesn't want to pick up under the clip. And last edge here. Just make sure that your stuff stays flat. This is the part where you're going to do a lot of smoothing and flattening and repinning and all that stuff to make sure that your stuff doesn't bunch. Because quilting it, I will tell you, depending on the thickness, you can get a lot of bunching under from your fabric below, or even your fabric on top, or even the batting, if it's not laid smooth, can pucker in there, and then you won't get a nice smooth effect. If you want a puffy effect, feel free. But okay, so now I'm going to lay my quilt top on there, and I'm just going to make sure it's nice and smooth. And I normally will use the tacking gun. With the tacking gun, there is a little plastic plate that has holes in it all over that you can slide underneath that keeps your quilt flat while you're poking through it. But I lost it, so I'm going to pin. You can use the quilt safety pins if you like, because they are bowed. You can lift it without lifting up your fabric too much, but I'm going to just use some straight pins. So starting from the center, I'm going to find a fairly good place here. And I want to make sure that I go through all my layers of fabric here. And because this has got that glitter stuff on it, it's gonna give me a hard time. There we go. All right. So I'm going to try and do all 4 segments of my center, and I'm going to smooth as I go. And you should be picking up all 3 layers when you do this. So I'm going to smooth it a little more. And then I'm going to move upward and around. And you're just going to repeat this all the way around your quilt. I'm just going to do a couple more panels for you just to show. How to pin it. And this just keeps it nice and smooth. Because as you're quilting, you're probably going to readjust too, so that you don't get puckering. This is a method I find just makes it easier. It may seem like a little more time consuming, but I get good results with it. So, okay, so I'm going to finish pinning all the way around, and then what I'm going to do is once I get that pinned, I'm going to start pinning from the top out and then start smoothing out and pinning down my sides and down the bottom. Now, one thing I failed to mention is make sure when you put your quilt top on, if you have directional fabric, that your fabric is going the correct direction, okay? So, because I did not. So I'm going to have to take this out and repin it back on there because, you know me. I got to do something silly. So, but it's okay. We all make mistakes and we learn from them. And so long as we figure it out and we move on, hopefully we won't do it again. Unless you're me. So anyways, let me pause the video. I'm going to repin it, resituate this, repin it, and I will kind of come on and show you like the last few pins for the border, and then we will get to doing, and then I will explain some feet that you can use for quilting, and then we're going to get to quilting. Okay, so I'm down to my last 4 pins here. See if I can get that one smoothed out. It seems like it's wanting to pucker a little bit. Okay, and so I pin from the center. And this is just my way of doing it. You can pin it however you like. Some people do it in like very strategic rows. There's different things on the internet that show you, you know, pinning it closer. I find this is a very small project, so we don't need to pin a bunch. But one thing I do is in my corners, I like to put my pin in a diagonal direction. I don't know. For me, it just seems to hold it down a little better. I don't think there's any real rhyme or reason to it. It's just something I like to do to keep my corners down. So I've used almost the whole circle of pins in there. And so we're ready to take this over to the sewing machine. But before we do that, let me just get it moved over real quick. And then I want to talk about some different quilting feet that you can use for your sewing machine. Your machine will come with a standard foot. And it may or may not come, if it's not a quilting machine, it won't come with quilting feet. But there are other feet that you can get for it if it didn't already come with it. Fairly inexpensive if you go online and look for them, that are really good for quilting. So you can use your standard foot, okay, your open-toed or your open slotted foot, which allows you to have different, putting your needle in different positions, okay, so you can use that. There is a, let's see, this one's an open toe quilting foot, which is really good. It's open toed here, so you can, and it attaches to your lift, so, and it has a spring in here so that it comes up and down. Okay, so you're not putting consistent pressure like you do with this foot. So it lifts up, and it allows the fabric to relax when it comes back down again. So you can use something like this. You can use a blind hem, which if you notice, this has a guide right in the center. And that guide in the center is awesome for what we're going to do today, which is a stitch in the ditch, because you can use the guide to put it right on the seam line and it'll stitch a straight line so long as your needle is in the middle position. Okay. And then I have an edging one that is intended. This is a stitch in the ditch edging. This one is designed specifically for my machine, but I think other machines do. I have a baby lock, but it's the same thing as the blind hem, okay, but it doesn't come down. It's not as thick as your blind hem is, okay, so it's a little bit thinner, and it's intended for that. That's what I use it for, okay. And you can use a walking foot. Okay, and you can buy these typically separate. This one came with my machine. It has feed dogs grips on the bottom, and you would drop your feed dogs on your machine. Now, every machine is different in how it's done. I'm not going to show you how to do that, but you can go online and say, how do I drop my dog feeds on a Singer or a Kenmore, or, you know, whatever kind of machine that you have. Because this will walk it. This attaches to your up and down arm, you know, for your attachment screw to attach like your feet. So it goes up and down, and when it goes up and down, it walks the fabric through from the top instead of the bottom. Okay, so this one really, my machine says, my booklet says it's intended for piping and doing like thick zippers if you have like flannel or thick fabric, to do a zipper using this so that you don't have the puckering. I have another walking foot that actually plugs into my machine, and it does a grid, and it really is intended to do more like line, so that your lines are all lined up and it stitches that way. Okay, so it's a little fancier, but I'm not using that one today because I'm not going to do one. I'm just going to do a stitch in the ditch. So it's a very simple stitch because it's right in the seam allowance. So this is the foot I'm going to use today. I am going to set my machine at, let's see, at 4 or 16 inches per inch, 16 stitches per inch, or if you're using metric, 4. Okay, so it's a little bit longer. That stitch is not intended to piece your or hold your quilt together. It's there as a decorative. Okay, so that's essentially what we're doing. It is putting everything together. I mean, it's attaching, let's face it, it's attaching all 3 layers. However, it's not intended for the stability of the quilt top. Let's just say that. So let's go ahead and move over to the machine. I put the camera a little bit closer so it's like right up in my face, so I'm going to try and whisper so I don't blow your eardrums out. And I turned on my projector to a single line so that you guys can see that it, you know, you can use something like that if you have it, or you can even put a piece of tape going down from the middle. Just, you know, you're not even going to see it underneath the quilt, but just so that you can see. I put it on so that you can see how, if it's not close enough, how it's stitching in that line in that ditch. Okay, so let's go ahead and move over to the machine. All right, so if you can see, I have my projector line on. I've got my quilting stitch in the ditch foot here. So one thing I do want to talk about, let me take this back off so you can see. So my machine has a locking stitch, so I can start and stop, and it will cut it when I stop if I want it to, or I can just do a locking stitch. A locking stitch essentially like a back stitch. All right. Because you don't want to do a heavy back stitch because you don't want it to be noticeable, here's what I suggest if your machine does not do that. all right, is you're going to want to put your needle down with your bobbin in and your needle threaded. Put your needle down and then needle back up. You can use the roller if you have one, and you should be able to, well, let's try it again, pull up that bottom bobbin thread. Then you're going to pull both threads so that you have a good couple, 3-4 inches. And the reason why I say that is I'm going to have you do 1 stitch forward, 1 stitch back, and 1 stitch forward. So it's almost like a locking stitch. I'm going to start my quilt that way, but I'm going to continue to use my locking stitch the remainder of the time. But this allows you to have that excess thread so that when you finish your quilt, when we're all done, you can take a small embroidery needle, thread it, and tuck it, poke it through the fabric and pull it through to hide that excess thread. Some people knot the bottom of it so that it won't, if it tries to come undone, it will knot on the back inside the quilt. So I'll show you all that. We're going to start with this, but then from there on, this is what you want to do for every time you cut or pick up your foot to, move it to somewhere else that's not continuous. And with this one, I can't figure out how to do a continuous jigsaw like this. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right in the center between my two big blocks here, right in the center. And I'm going to find, and I'm going to align my line right in that ditch. And this little guide is going to help me, because remember, you don't want to watch your needle. You want to watch where you're sewing. So let's see, that's going to be over just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch one, I'm going to back stitch one, and then I'm going to go forward. Because if you back stitch and do like 3 full stitches on there, it'll be noticeable. So I am just going to take my time. If you're a beginner, this is what you're going to want to do. You can speed it up just a little bit if you're using a guide. But if you're using an open toe, just make sure that you take your time. And you're going to want to smooth out a little bit. Make sure you don't have any wrinkles. And because I want my outer border around the blocks to be one continuous stitch, I'm not going to stitch over and up. I'm going to end a stitch there. So, and if you come out of the stitch, see, this is why I don't like pins. I poke myself a lot. So if you get a pucker, just pull your pin and re-smooth it out again, because I'm sure you're going to get plenty. That is normal. That is very normal. If you come out of the ditch a little bit, that's okay. Really, it's just the intent is for you to try and get in the stitch to kind of give a quilted look without seeing the stitch too much. That's why coordinating fabric is really important. But if you want to see the stitch, by all means, use a darker thread and you can offset it just a little bit. So as I'm doing this, I'm smoothing and I'm taking out my bottom pin and I'm just readjusting and re-smoothing. And there goes my rooster. He's decided that he is just going to make a noisy now. Be a noisy boy today. And the good thing about stopping down at the bottom is it gives you an opportunity to lay it flat again and repin or readjust your pins if you need to, so that you don't get too much puckering. Because one thing, sometimes if you come down to an end like this and you have a pucker, that fabric will pucker up there and you'll see it. Okay, so when I get down to the end down here, I'm going to take one stitch back and then one stitch forward, okay? And then I'm going to just cut my threads. So I have this nice long thread. Do not cut that thread. If you sew over it, that's okay. Just kind of pull it out a little bit, okay? Which I'll do here in a minute. But your back should be nice and long. And then what I'm going to do is I'll take a needle. Oh, let's move this over in the camera. I will take a needle and I will thread it, and then I'm going to just take it up under like the first layer and just pull it back. You can put a little knot in there and then pull it, you know, pull it through and then poke the needle on the other end and just pull it and then trim that little excess. And then that knot back there will be underneath your fabric and it'll hold it in place. Mine does a little knot on it anyways, and I can just trim the back on here. Okay, I don't want to come out. Something's snagging on it. There we go. But I'll leave that out, and I'm going to show you how to do that when we come to the end of our quilting. So now what I want to do is I'm going to come down and make another straight line, but I want to make sure that I'm not puckering anywhere. So I want to lay it out again on the table, and I just want to smooth it as much as possible. Okay, so let me slide this over and do that real quick. Let me pause, and if I can get my little mouse to work here. I'll pause, re-smooth, and then we'll go down one more line here. All right, so I've re-smoothed here. Move my mouse over. And I'm sorry. Now I'm going to do the same thing here, where I'm going to leave a long line if you don't have the knotting capability. If you feel comfortable that one or even two, if you don't think it's that noticeable, you can do that and then just trim your excess. But if you're not comfortable, or you're using a darker or thicker, heavier thread, then by all means, please make sure you leave yourself a tail. So you may have to, you know, put your needle down and pull it back up again and just pull it through. When you cut your, if you don't have a cutter on yours, just, you know, as you know, lift your foot and lift your needle, lift your foot and pull it out away from the machine, and then just snip it, you know, or actually snip it closer to your foot. All right, so I'm going to do another straight line down here, and then I'm going to work in corners. So I'll do this segment here, and then I'll do the bottom segment. This allows me to smooth out section by section, and it'll lay flatter. If I went all 4 sections and I didn't, you know, I mean, I could do this section and then that section, but I prefer to work in areas here. It really just depends on how well you can get your fabric just a little bit back. There we go. So I have a knotting stitch, so it's going to go down 3 times, and then it's just going to start quilting or walking. And then I'm just going to take my time, making sure I watch for puckering in the upcoming fabric that's coming its way. And I know some people are like, I just don't have the patience for that. And see how it's starting to kind of pucker here? I'm going to take it and smooth it and repin. Same thing here. Okay. And just do it in small increments. You don't have to do it all the way down to the bottom if you don't want to. Just keep an eye on where it begins to pucker up in front of the, because you might see some puckering over here, and that's okay, because it'll kind of give that nice quilted look. but you don't want massive puckering, because then your fabric won't lay flat and nice. So now it's starting to pucker a little bit, so I need to smooth it and repin as I go. And I poke my fingers a lot. I should use those little rubber fingers, which I do have. I just, sometimes they're a little tight on my fingers. And okay, smooth that again. And we're getting closer to the bottom, so I am going to take that pin from the border and repin it. And you might have to repin a couple times, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're any less advanced or expertise, have less expertise. It's about, just making sure that you have a nice flat surface. Okay, I'm going to do one more stitch, and then I'm going to back stitch it, and then of course, if you don't have a back stitch, lift your needle, lift your foot, pull it out, and trim here. Okay, so now, I don't know if you can see this, but let's see if you can see. There's a stitch that runs all the way down here. Let's see if we can get it in so that it'll focus. I can see the stitch line very, very close, but you have to get up really close to look to find it. And that's what is called stitching in the ditch, right? So now what I want to do is I want to work on this corner. So I am going to, I want to make one continuous line across here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work this little area here. Make sure we're all smooth all the way across. And just that little, because I'm going to work these two blocks here, this one and this one. I'm going to come down and do straight, back stitch, come down, back stitch, come down, back stitch, come down, back stitch, and then I'm going to turn it and do those lines there. Okay. And remember, if you have a locking stitch on your machine or a back stitch on your machine, it's gonna put the majority or the knot on the back side of your fabric, which it's gonna be up against the wall, and you can trim those down if you need to. So we're gonna do back. It's gonna do my little pickup stitch here, and same thing. I'm just gonna take my time and stitch in that ditch. And the nice thing about this guide, every once in a while it might pop out, but it's so minute you can't tell. I mean, unless you're not following the guide. And it may seem like, oh, I gotta cut and move, but and in future videos I'm going to show you guys how to do stimpling, which you use a free motion. And in those kind of things, when you're doing big, I'll explain a little bit about, but you'll wear the best way to do it is to wear like gardening gloves that are clean and new, obviously, and because the grip helps you to hold your quilt while you're moving it freestyle underneath. You can do it plain-handed, but you got a lot of pins that you're dealing with. But in that motion, you're going to do one continuous just all over. So you won't have to worry too much about having pickup stitches and all that in there. So, and see, mine will leave a small tail, which I could not. And but that's a very small bit to try and get. I don't know if you can see it here, but it's only about this long, and it's very hard to try and get into a small embroidery needle. Okay, so I'm going to finish this block here, and then I am going to move down. I'm going to finish these 4 blocks, and then I'll show you, and then I'm going to move over. Actually, I'm going to move down because I want to work on this side of my quilt here. And like I said, just take your time. There is no rush, or you should not be rushing. I mean, that's what gives really good quality in what you're doing. And that is because when I do rush, I do make a lot of mistakes. And I think most quilters will tell you the same thing. All right, so I am done with that block. I can pull this pin if I so choose, because I'm not going to do anything else in there. Grab my pin circle and put my pin back. All right, and then now I'm going to move over to this segment. I want to smooth and repin. The motion of it only takes a few seconds to do, so it's really not that hard. So, and then I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to work from here out. Okay, I don't work from this side in. I want to work outwards so that I can smooth my fabric as I go. So I'm going to put you on pause. I'm going to finish up these blocks here, okay, because I'm going to move across. I'm going to go back to this one and then move across, and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do next. So let me find my little mouse here and pause. All right, so I finished this block. I've trimmed all my long pieces only on the front. I can do the back after I'm all done. I left my long tail here up at the top so I can show you guys how to tie that off. Okay, and it's nice and flat, but I keep my side pins all around my border. I want to keep those down because I don't want them flapping up, okay, and I don't want my fabric shifting. So I need to work down here, but in order to do that, to keep it smooth from here on out, I do have to come all the way. I want to go across this whole line all the way across to the top, to the next border, that center line right there. So that's the only line I'm going to do on that side to separate it. So now, if you are not comfortable doing that because you don't feel that it's going to shift, you can start from the center and work out. Okay? In fact, let's go ahead and do that just so I can show you. We'll go ahead and start in that center. Here, move my mouse. But normally you would want to try and do one continuous flow. But since we're only working on 1/2 right now, let's see if we can get that in there. Right in that center. And I'm just going to move it across. But as you can see, my quilt is laying very nice and flat. Taking my time and trying to look over the camera because this camera is right in my face. Alright. Take it all the way to the edge of the border. Okay. Alright, so we have this one square all done. Alright, I'm going to snip that little thread there. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to work from my center, this center portion on the bottom block, and move my way over. And then the same thing as I'm smoothing out my quilt as I go. Okay, so do the same thing, and then when you move over, you're going to do the same thing on the top. Okay, so you're going to move and back up on the top, do these uppers, and then you can come all the way across if you so choose. Actually, we can go because this is already quilted, we can go all the way across and then work the top two. So let me reiterate. Do your bottom these four patches down here. Then you're going to move up, and then you're going to want to go stitch from the quilt side that's already done, and all the way over. So let me finish this one, and then I will come back and show you what I'm talking about so you don't get confused. Okay? All right, so let me finish. Go ahead and quilt. Do your stitch in the ditch for the bottom, that bottom patch, that bottom block down there. Okay, so pause. Okay, so now I've gotten this bottom block all sewn, and now what I want to do is move back up to my upper left-hand corner. But what I want to do is although we sewed down that middle, we didn't sew here and we haven't sewn here. So what I want to do is sew this all the way down so that I can start working on this upper left-hand corner over here. And that's what I was talking about. So, and you can certainly do like we did in the center and just start it in the middle. But I want one nice continuous line here. So, just going to start over here and just go all the way across from border to border. Taking our time. Stitching in that ditch. And then there's something I want to show you because I smoothed out, before I did this, I went ahead and smoothed this whole corner out. And just to show you that this can happen and it's normal and it's nothing to really get freaked out about, okay, is and by doing this in segments like this, it's going to, and you smooth it, it's going to help keep your quilt laying nice and flat, and you will get you're going to get some puckering because it's, after all, it is quilting, okay, and you're going through 3 layers of fabric. And some quilters will swear by a walking foot. You need to use a walking foot, and that's not necessarily the case. You still get shifting under a walking foot. All right, and when I say it's not really puckering, it's just more because you're stitching something, and so when you stitch up and down, you're going to have some tension in there, and it's going to pull the fabric threads. That's just normal. So when I flip this up, this line, this edge was even. This is how much it's actually pulled on the back side. And when we get all done, I'm going to show you the back, but that's okay. That's kind of normal. So all I do is just readjust and make sure that my edges are clipped, But by clipping those, you have much less and it lays much flatter. All right, so now that I've split my blocks again, or my patches, I can start working again. I'm going to work from the center outward. So I'm going to work from here to here, then from here to here. Then I can take and go back from my center here and go all the way here. When I finish that, I can quilt this patch, and then I would suggest going all the way and taking that border to border stitch again, and then working your last 2 patches. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that, and then what I'm going to do is finish this up, and then I'm going to meet you back over at the workstation over there so I can show you. Actually, once I get this done, there's one more thing I want to do, is I want you to stitch around the whole edge, around that center block there. So I'm going to show you it's the same as doing stitch in the ditch. But I do want to show you kind of what I'm talking about in case you're a little confused with what do you mean by the center block. So, all right, so go ahead and pause the video now, finish up doing those inner 4 blocks the way I showed you. And then when you're done with that, come on back and I'm going to show you what I mean by stitching around the inner block there. All right. All right, so now I've got my full top centerpiece quilted. Now what I want to do is I want to stitch in the ditch all the way around the quilt where the quilt center meets the border. So I'm just going to start. You can start in any quarter you want, starting in a corner, and you can do the same thing. Like I said, if you don't have a back stitch or you don't have a locking stitch, just make sure you leave yourself a long enough tail to tuck it. And all you're going to do is find that little corner there. There we go. And then stitch in the ditch all the way around. Make sure before you do that, you smooth out your edges all the way out on your border because you don't want any puckering. Now, that being said, if you do or have done any part of this quilt top before you do this, if you have puckering in any edge where the fabric bunched, rip out that one seam, because if you've done a small enough block seam there, it's only a small segment that you're going to need to take out and re-smooth it out before you continue, because once you block this in, you've essentially blocked it in. And if you want to smooth that edge, you're going to have to take out your border stitch to do that. So make sure you do it now if you have any. All right, so let's go. I'm gonna do one edge and then I'll let you guys finish up mine, and then move back over to the work table. And we're going to clip all those little strings on the back, and then I'm going to show you how to how you're going to hide your long stitches there if you use them. Just take your time. If you notice any puckering, just reposition just like you did in the quilt. Center. Slow and steady. I normally go a little bit faster, but I just want to make sure that you guys see that, when you take your time, if you've never done this before, to go ahead and take your time. So when I get to the corner, what I'm going to do is get right onto that corner if I can. If I'm not on the corner, because I'm just outside of it, I'm going to pick up my needle, pick up my foot, and just pull it back a little bit, just so that I can stick my needle back in that corner. Oop, didn't quite go. There we go. Now, my needle is back down. I'm going to lift my foot and turn it. And I'm going to do the same thing all the way down this way. Okay? So, just continue on till you get to the end, and then I'll meet you back over at the workstation. We gotta get this thing paused here first. And one thing I do want to mention to you guys before we finish the border stitch in the ditch, don't take your pins out. Leave your pins in place, because you're going to want to make sure that those borders are laying nice and flat, because you're going to smooth it out one more time before you attach the binding. So leave those pins in there. Okay, so at this point we have our whole quilt top quilted, right? Or our wall hanging top, front and back, all quilted. So what I'm going to do is, because mine does like that locking stitch, I have a lot of excess little pieces back here, and I'm going to make sure I don't trim that one because that's the one I want to show you guys how to tuck with. So I'm just going to go back here and very carefully just snip these excess threads. You don't have to, you can leave them, but me personally, I prefer to not have them there. Sorry. We have a dairy farm across the street, well, next door and across the street, and sometimes the cows get over in the field across the street, and my little Uber-Duber likes to bark at him like he's telling him don't go there or something. I mean, you'd figure by now he'd figure it out, so. But anyway, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to trim all the rest of these little things and these little threads. And then, but if you can see when you quilt, okay, some of the fabric does pull on the back. That's perfectly normal. That's why we're going to have excess around it, because it's going to give that nice puffy on the back, but you get this nice smooth on the front, okay? So, like I said, if you get any puckering, you need to take that out before you do that outer border. So let me go ahead and finish trimming this up, because I'm trying to keep the video down too long, because we still need to do our binding. All right, so what I have done is trimmed up all those pieces, all those excess little thread, hangy threads there. And now what I want to do is, if you've used those long tail ends and you need to tuck them, you want to use a very small needle. And this stinks because I hate small needles. But just so that I can show you guys what to do with those tails. You can do this at the end after you finish your quilt if you want. I just prefer to do it. It just seems to be easier to do it as I go before I put my binding on, because really my binding, let me get my readers real quick. My binding is kind of like my finishing thing. So once I'm done with my binding, I know I'm done. Well, other than signing your quilt, which I will kind of show you how to do. I can make a little tag for the back of that. So I'm going to thread my needle. And if you so choose, you can put a small knot in here. I'm not going to, but you can put a small knot. And then you're just going to feed that needle back through the threaded area, picking up try to just pick up that quilted fabric, just the backing fabric for the back on this one. All right. Let's see if I can get it in here. I got this gold stuff on here, and make sure it's not going through. And then I'm just going to feed it down a ways and pull it back out through that fabric. And then you pull to tug that knot underneath it, okay? And then you scrunch the fabric just a little bit, cut it, and then that thread hides in that fabric. Where'd that needle go? Do the same thing on the front. I'll put a little knot on there just to kind of show you guys if I can get this thing threaded. The thread is frayed. I hate these little needles. I can't use them anymore. Okay. Oop, I had it and then it came out. There we go. All right, so I'm going to create a small little knot here. You can do this before you thread it if you want. Ooh, come on. Okay, so I've got a knot here. I'll put my thread, or put my needle right below the thread, the knot, sorry. And I'm going to try and thread it back down where it was at. And then I'm going to have to go a long ways with this one because of where the knot is. And make sure it's not through the back. And pull the thread. There's the knot. There we go. Then I'm going to pull up on it to push back the fabric, and then it's hidden. And there's a knot in there. So even if you did one stitch forward, one stitch back, one stitch forward to continue, you shouldn't have any unraveling. But that's just an extra way to kind of secure it if you don't have a locking stitch on your machine. Just so you have it. And yeah, you'll have to do that with all of those start and stop areas if you didn't backstitch or don't have, a way to lock it. If and mainly if you've backstitched it, it shouldn't be a problem, especially with a wall hanging. It's just more for like security when you wash it. Okay, so now that my quilt is we're now prepping to do the binding. This video is going to be a little longer because I do want to try and get it all done. Well, actually, we could do a part 4, I think, just for binding, because binding is something that is very important that you do it right. So, and we're already almost at an hour. So really what we want to do here is, I'll just do a part 4, no biggie. I'm going to upload them all together. So is just re-smooth out my edges here, because I'm going to cut. I'm going to do that in this video. Doesn't matter what direction your needle goes in, whatever direction is comfortable for you to put in. Also, if you have a needle that struggles to go through the fabric, and you really got to push at it, your needle is dull. Grab another needle and try again. All right. Because we once again want a nice flat, even, border to attach our binding to, so we don't get puckering on the binding. I do believe that is all 4 corners smoothed out. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my clips off. I'm going to keep my remaining clips on it, but as I cut, I'm going to cut down this edge. You can use a straight, if you're uncomfortable with your cutting straight, you can use the edge of a ruler and just put it to the very edge of your quilt and just do it like that, right? I'm going to do that. See, my mat is not equipped for such a large, because it only goes to, I think, like 24. And this is going to be, what, 23? It might fit. Yeah, let's try it. Let's try it. Because chances are you're probably going to want to do that. I cut mine normally because I have some really great scissors that, let's put it the long ways here, this way. Okay. And I'm going to shift over my clips here so my ruler doesn't lay on it. But I have some really good scissors that have flat bottoms here, so I can lay it flat on the mat as I cut, and it helps me cut much straighter. But what I want to do is lay that out. Actually, let me take these clips off so that I don't get any bumping, and I get a nice smooth edge here. And of course, don't forget you got pins on there, so it's not going to lay completely flat. You just got to make sure you're not using the rule on the mat itself. You're using the edge of the ruler, the straight edge of the ruler, to smooth out, because you might have a little bit of the, like here I have just a hair, like a 1/16 of an inch that sticks out over here, and it could just be from quilting. All right, hold that down flat. There we go. Look at that. Now that edge is straight and ready for binding. I'm going to turn it and do the same thing. Nice clean edge. And you're going to do that with all 4. Hold it, just hold your ruler nice and tight. I didn't quite get that edge right there. So what I'm going to do is just measure it and cut it. Because I want it to go bump up against there, because we need a 1/4 inch to grab all 3 layers here with that 1/4 inch binding seam allowance there. All right, that's good right there. A little piece of batting, and it's not going to make that big of a difference, because I'm going to pin it to the edge of my quilt. So, and I've seen some people actually put the binding on first and then trim. I don't like to do that, because for me personally, I think there's just way too much chance of cutting it a little bit too short. And your binding is very important. Okay, kind of a long edge here. What is going on? So what I'm going to do is slide this. I am going to straighten this piece out, because it looks like this one edge here is a little longer. So I'm going to try and square it off, and that's okay. Just could be some shifting. I don't really mind, because I'm just going to keep this anyways and hang it in my office. I have my other one that I did up for, you know, so that I could follow the instructions and do it by the instructions. Not have any issues. Okay. Edge to edge. And normally I have one that has like I showed in that other video. I probably should have used that one, but it needs a new blade, and I just haven't had time to change it out yet. And so, all right, so now our quilt top batting and backing is ready for binding. We're going to do that in another video, because we are already at about 1:05, or an hour, 5:05. I wish we could do all this in 1:05. About an hour, 5 minutes. So I want to try and keep them so that they're not over, you know, and they're hard to upload when they're that large. So I'll just do one more video, no biggie. And in future videos, because if you watch this one, you'll have a little more experience with piecing. I won't have to spend as much time in each area. I just wanted to give you guys a good idea on what's to come. So anyway, thanks for joining me. Hopefully I will catch you all on the next video. We're going to do our binding. We're all ready. I'm just take a minute to just look at how far you got. It's amazing, huh? So pretty. And so yeah, I'll piece the binding together, show you how we do that, and we'll attach it to the quilt and show you how to sew it on there, and then we will be done. Well, we'll have to sign it first, but